Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and I'm an artist and an entrepreneur. And yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creatives, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 29 of the podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and today I am welcoming my October guest host to the show, freelance writer and journalist, Gabby Peyton. Welcome to the show, Gabby.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm really excited to be here.
I am super happy to have you here with me. So before we dive into the interview, I'm just going to give you a brief little introduction to Gabby and who she is. As I mentioned, she is a freelance writer and journalist based out of St. John's, Newfoundland. She is also currently the restaurant critic for The Telegram. Prior to that, she was the associate editor for Atlantic Business Magazine, and she is a woman of many creative interests, I think it's fair to say.
Fair to say for sure.
She is equally at home writing about high finance as she is writing about food and travel and everything in between. She has also been on multiple archaeological digs in Turkey. She has worked as a dig illustrator, something that I am so jealous of. I think that is just one of the coolest things ever. And today we're going to dive in and get to know her a little bit better. She's going to be with us for the whole month, and in the following 3 weeks we're going to dive into some more business related topics, particularly around writing and journalism and being a freelancer. So I'm excited to talk about those as well. So Gabby, tell us a little bit about when you were younger. Did you identify as being creative when you were a kid? Is that something that you knew?
You know, it's really funny because when I was really young, like in grade school, I always really identified with Anne of Green Gables and really wanted to be a writer / teacher. That was like what I wanted to be when I was a kid. And then somewhere along the way, I, thought maybe that wasn't a thing I could do and kind of forgot about it. And then once I was doing my master's in art history, of all things, I kind of started thinking that I wanted to do more writing, and not just academic writing, but kind of journalistic things and that kind of stuff. So I kind of went full circle, wanting to be Anne of Green Gables, and then kind of losing that, wanted to be maybe a history teacher or something like that, and then totally going to journalism through food writing.
That's so funny. I wanted to be Anne of Green Gables too. So I identified with her so much. She is still my favorite literary character. So
oh my gosh.
She's
amazing.
Anne with an E. I was just talking to a friend the other day about where she wrote the baking soda romance story and how it was like that was one of the first sponsored posts.
Yes, exactly. That's awesome. And it's so funny because I never really considered myself like having a goal to be a journalist, but then my grandparents passed away years ago. My aunt lives in their house and found a newspaper that I had made when I was 10 years old over Easter vacation about the Babels Times where my grandparents lived. And I had all these like great little articles in it, and I had completely forgotten I'd done it. I mean, that was 25 years ago. But I guess, it was always in there. I just didn't realize.
That's so funny. So it just comes around. And the funny thing is, though, you didn't initially go to school for journalism, did you?
No, I did not. I had many degrees prior to getting my journalism degree. I actually went to Memorial here in St. John's and did an undergrad in history and French, and had really the full intention to be a high school teacher because it just kind of felt like the only option, I think, in St. John's at the time. Everyone I knew in the arts was becoming a teacher. That was kind of felt like the only option. But by the time I finished my undergrad, I knew I wanted to do more than that. I had spent some time in Greece I did an archaeological study program, and then I was, fell in love with art history. So I went to the University of Toronto and did my master's in art history there. And then after that, I started the blog, The Food Girl in Town. And then I went to journalism school after that. So it was a long journey to get there. Writing all along the way, I guess. But yeah, it was not a direct path for sure.
No, it's funny though. We do have a very similar path. I did my BA in history and I was going to be a high school history teacher,
Mm.
and I have a minor in archaeology. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think for a lot of us when we go into arts, especially things like English and history, you
Yeah,
do really kind of feel like your only option is teaching. And yeah.
absolutely. And even during my master's, I mean, I think I had met so many PhD students who kind of terrified me out of doing my PhD because there was all that doom and gloom around, oh, if you won't get a job, it's too hard. So even like advancing academically was became intimidating as well. Even not necessarily a high school teacher, but being a university teacher, just the lack of opportunity also was kind of looming over me. So I
Yeah.
decided I actually got into a PhD program at the University of Victoria and
Oh.
decided not to go and do journalism instead. So here we are.
What made you decide to go back and do art history though? Like, was it really because you thought you were on an academic track at that point, or was it?
I kind of thought I might be. I just fell in love with it. I was really like, I technically have a minor in classics as well, but you can't, I guess at Mon you didn't really get a double minor, but did a lot of classics courses and I just fell in love with ancient art. I just thought it was the most fascinating thing. And I loved being in school. So I just thought, okay, this is where I'll go next and then I'll figure it out. So I just loved it.
And where did going? So you mentioned that you did a program as part of university where you went to Greece
Yeah.
on an archaeological dig, and then is that what led to? Because I think you did some more digs in Turkey, if I'm
I
right.
did. They
Is
weren't
that
actually related, but obviously building on those skills. I did through Memorial had a some travel study programs. So I spent 6 weeks in Greece with a bunch of other students, and we traveled around Greece studying art and architecture, and it was the coolest
mm,
thing, you know. It was like a, kind of spring semester thing in May.
right?
And then that was like maybe in my second to last year of university in my undergrad. And then from there, that's kind of where it really amped up when I wanted to do art history. My honors supervisor in my undergrad is a lovely woman who I'm still friends with. Called me up after I did my master's and said, "Hey, I'm going to Turkey. Do you want to come work on the dig for the summer?" And I mean, how do you say no to that? It was just an amazing experience for me. I mean, I had a lot of archaeological knowledge, but not necessarily practical archaeological
Yes.
knowledge. So that was it was a quick learning curve for sure, but it was actually, I went 3 years, 3 summers working at the same little dig called Çayırhöyük in a tiny town called Panur, which translates to "I don't like cheese," which is like the most oxymoronic part of my life.
That doesn't fit. No. What kind of dig was it? What were you digging up?
So it's a huyuk. So a huyuk in Turkish basically is like a hill. So it was kind of periods from the Chalcolithic, so 5000 BC, all the way up until like the 1400s. So during the Crusades, when the town was abandoned. So it was basically a town that had been inhabited for like thousands of years on top of this hill. So they were digging in the sides of the hill in order to kind of get like a timeline. So yeah, it was amazing.
That's just fascinating to me. Like, so interesting. Like I said, I have a minor in archaeology, but I have no
Yeah,
practical dig experience. Like, that's just not something you get when you do a minor. It's all very theoretical,
absolutely.
and so having the actual opportunity to go out, I'm so jealous of that. Um,
Well, I definitely, yeah, it was definitely a quick learning curve because I knew nothing practically. I literally
yeah.
brought like a garden spade as my spade to like dig things and like left it in my bag the whole summer because I realized that was not what I needed. And just had like a bunch of little things that I didn't know anything about, but quickly fell into illustrating as you mentioned earlier. So
Yeah,
that I lucked out.
that was going to be my next question, because you haven't mentioned anywhere that you love to draw or anything like that. And I was just like, how did you wind up as the illustrator on the dig, and what exactly did that entail, for those who are
Well,
curious?
so it's funny how it happened because I kind of was put into that because I think I didn't really have that practical experience to necessarily be digging or dealing with kind of, precious artifacts right off the bat. So they had me kind of initially, all the squares or all the places where we were digging on the dig are 9 meters, so 3 meters by 3 meters. And so we would draw those out to scale on some graph paper, and then you would kind of fill in things, and you would do that every so many layers or every so many centimeters that you dug down. So I got put on this with another newish archaeological student. And I started sketching and drawing and doing it, you're doing all the measuring, but you're sketching in kind of the extra rocks or different formations that don't necessarily, you don't get every point. And I, halfway through my first drawing, my supervisor came over and she was like, "That's really good." And I just didn't realize, and they were all very oohing and awing over my work. And so from then on, I became the illustrator on the dig. So I kind of went around all the different trenches and was doing that. And I did that for 3 years. So,
cool.
Yeah.
So you were actually drawing things in situ then?
Yes.
Was, okay. So that's even more interesting. I thought you were like drawing them after they had been removed and sort of.
I did also draw pottery shards, which is like the most boring thing you could draw. But every little shard of pottery that comes up, we draw it, and you sketch out the kind of whatever paint or whatever's on it to kind of, so that way you can see if there was imports and exports into the region and that kind of stuff. So it had a method to it, but that was a little more boring than being out in the field and drawing things.
Oh wow, so interesting. Yeah, and you haven't done that. Well, I mean, I guess it's not, traveling is not really on our menu right now, but is that something you plan on continuing on with?
I would really like to continue. Yeah. I did it. The last dig I did was 2017. Then there was the coup in Turkey. So Turkish archaeology kind of halted for expats. So it kind of just took a weird turn. And it's kind of the dig. The two people who are the directors there are older and ready to retire. So there's kind of some different things shifting there. I have been in talks possibly with going to Italy and doing some stuff, but that's still kind of in there, obviously, right now.
Yeah.
That was when we can get there. But yeah, I'm doing some Byzantine stuff in Italy, so that would be really interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah. Wow. That's very cool. It is very creative in its own way, like especially from the illustration standpoint and everything. And I just, with the history and everything, it fascinates me. So when you went to do your master's degree, that took you to Toronto. And I know you wound up in Toronto for quite a while. Did you come back to do your back to Newfoundland to do your second bachelor's degree, or did you stay?
It was actually in Halifax. So I did my master's in Toronto, and then I moved to Halifax with my then boyfriend, now husband, Adam, while he was in law school. That's when I started the blog, and then I went to journalism school there in Halifax.
And is that when the writing really started to become part of 100%. What you were doing? Yeah. Just in there.
The Food Girl in Town became, I had always wanted to just have some kind of blog or do some kind of writing. And I had really, having worked in the service industry at different restaurants to pay my way through university, I really fell in love with food, and I really loved eating out and writing about it. So I started the blog kind of on a whim. Actually, I celebrated my 8th blogiversary last week, which I had to post about. Yeah, thank you. So started that, and kind of, really the blogging community in Halifax during that time was really strong.
It was, yes.
Kathy Jollmore and Kelly Neal in particular, like really took me under their wing and befriended me right away. And I had this little group of people of women, I should say, who were really inspiring and really supportive. So I was able to kind of find my own niche there and write and do all kinds of stuff. And then I did that for 2 years, and then I decided to go to journalism school. So the University of King's has a 1-year bachelor in journalism. So that's how I got my way in there.
Okay. It was a quick bachelor's degree.
Yeah, it's a post, so you have to have an undergrad already in order to do it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then you moved back to Toronto, because I think when we first met, you were living in Toronto.
Yes, I was. Yes. So we moved back after after we both finished our degrees, feeling that there would be more opportunity there for a food writer and a lawyer to kind of spread their wings. So we ended up there for a few years after that as well. Yeah.
And so when did you start actually diving into the freelance writing?
It's actually before I went to journalism school. I kind of started pitching random little blogs or publications that I, again, like Kelly Neal and Kathy Elmore were both, there were other women in the community who were kind of just pitching places. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to do it. So I did a couple little travel blogs, guest posting first, and then doing some paid freelance stuff. But it really went heavy like once I got to Toronto, for sure. Doing a lot of, very low paid roundup kind of situations at the beginning. And then I really started to dig into the food history niche as well. So that was when I was doing some stuff for the Daily Hive in Toronto. I was doing kind of like the oldest pizza shops and the diners that have been around for a long time and those kind of stuff. So that's when I really started, flexing that history muscle that was always there, but I got to kind of use it in a journalistic way too.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think that's not too far off from around when you started writing about Canadian food history for Food Bloggers of Canada. And this was one of the, when you pitched me this idea, it was not something I had thought of at all, but I loved it. And it has actually been one of our most popular series on the site. And it's fascinating to me that so very few people write about this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And yet there is so much hunger for it. Like, people really do want to know that. And it's interesting how many of the articles you've written for us, and I'm pretty sure other places that you've done this, have actually been picked up by things like Google has an education tool, I can't remember what it's called, where teachers can assign reading for their students based on articles they've found around the internet. And I can't remember what the name of the tool is, but it took me a while to figure out what was going on. We were getting traffic to one of your articles that you had written. I think it was on the history of the Nanaimo bar. And I was like, well, this is interesting. And then somebody explained to me, like, yeah, that's coming from a school. A teacher has assigned that as compulsory reading for a class. And I was like, well, that's awesome. Super interesting. But yeah, it's not something, I think, because in Canada we tend to think we don't really have a cuisine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think so much of it too, people just automatically go poutine, which is really Quebec's, and and they kind of generalize. And there's so much uniqueness, across Canada, and such a rich history of immigration that people don't kind of glaze over. We think of a lot of, like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, white food. So there's so much here that has been contributed by different people, and that we have this great history. And there is such a large food history movement in the US, but we don't really have that same community here. There is, I'm part of a great Facebook group called the Culinary Historians of Canada, and they're a little Ontario centric, but like also an amazing resource, and lots of cookbooks and antique stuff like that, and it's awesome. But there isn't really a huge number of people writing about it.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
And it's such an interesting topic. Yeah, and there's so much you can do with it. It's not just even the history about specific foods, but different places and communities. I mean, there's so many communities across Canada that are that revolve around food, and certain parts of certain cities, that you go to, because that's like a food mecca, for a lack of a better term.
Absolutely. There's different things who doesn't go to Montreal and try to eat at Schwartz's if they can, stand the line? Or there's different places all across Canada that people will, go to in droves because they've, someone has told them about that, or it's been there, for 50 years, and it just, it's just so much a part of that. I actually have a few different, through different research, there's the Winnipeg Cuban lunch, which I know nothing about, but I'm got to dive into that because I know nothing about it. But there's so many different little dishes in different cities and pockets that, or like a Jig's dinner in Newfoundland. That is one question people ask me constantly, where they can get that at a restaurant. I'm like, you just have to go to someone's nan's house and eat it. And that's kind of, so it's, or the cold plate is really big here too.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about pitching in another episode, specifically around pitching for writing in publications. But how did that come about? Like you mentioned, people like Kelly and Kathy in Halifax who helped you out. And for those who don't know, Kelly Neal is a food photographer based out of Halifax, and Kathy, who is since married, she's Kathy Darbyson now, I think. She runs a restaurant with her partner in Halifax called The Side Hustle, I believe.
It is, yes.
Yeah. So they have, I don't think, Kelly still blogs a little bit. I don't think Kathy does anymore, but they are still very entrenched in the food world. And, but how did you kind of, because I think this is a big mystery for so many people. It's like they want to be a writer,
Yep.
but they don't know how to get people to see their writing. Like, how
Well,
does that
okay.
happen?
It's so funny because Kelly actually, I mean, Kelly and Kathy both write for the Chronicle Herald every now and then. So they are both write for the newspaper in Halifax. They're part of the Saltwire Network. So we're both, my newspaper here, the Telegram, is also part of the Saltwire Network of papers. So I see their stuff all the time. They, I think, kind of use their blogs as their cred. I mean, that was for them. Look at all this writing I have. It's, your blog at some point can just be kind of like your portfolio. And that's kind of how I shifted it. So that's what I would, and pitching, I think, can be very intimidating. But realistically, the worst thing that could happen is that they just say no or they don't reply, and I've very rarely had anyone say, this is a bad pitch. Like, don't ever pitch me again. I mean, I actually have had that happen to me once, but I learned. They told me what I was doing wrong. It was way too long. Right. I think the biggest thing for me with pitching was having that first grabby line. Not like, hi, my name is Gabby Peyton. It's like, hi, this story is this. And that first line has always really helped kind of draw in. And me working as an editor at Atlantic Business Magazine, I used to get a lot of pitches, and that was the one thing. If you can grab them in the first line of that email, then that's it. And it doesn't really matter if you have a really good idea and it's formulated well and well written, then they don't really necessarily care about your cred at the same time. I think now more than ever, you don't necessarily need a journalism background. I mean, it definitely helps. I think I learned a lot about pitching in journalism school, but at the same time, I don't think it's not the same anymore.
Yeah, that's
so I think you kind of just have to do it. I think, if you find the person's for the Telegram to be the critic, they had a critic here, Carl Wells, for decades. He retired. He retired while I was at Atlantic Business, and I kind of was like, oh man, I would love to do that, but obviously I couldn't because of a conflict. So once I left Atlantic Business to go back to freelance, I literally sent an email with the subheading, why the Telegram needs a new critic and why it should be me. And then I just kind of was like, I want to be this person, and this is why. They were like, okay. So I think they were probably taken aback by my boldness, first of all. But then, I think I had the cred, I had the portfolio of my blog, and I had all my articles that kind of back that up. So yeah, so that's how that happened.
When you left Halifax and went back to Toronto to sort of start a life there, did you find that intimidating from a writing, like a pitching standpoint? I think a lot of, I live on the opposite side of the country, and I think for a lot of us, Toronto is we're always sort of told how Toronto is the center of the country for pretty much everything. And so some people, are very intimidated by that, especially coming from a smaller urban center. And others are kind of like, I don't care, I'm good enough to to be part of that scene. But did you find that something that was a little challenging, or were you just like, no, I'm here and I'm going to do this?
It was 100% intimidating. I went from a very small food writing community, a robust one in Halifax, but yet like people like I would recognize me in restaurants. Like that's like we used to joke I was Hallie famous, right? Like you had a level of, because there was a certain number of food bloggers that were everywhere all the time, that you kind of had that. And then I went to Toronto and no one knew me ever for anything. So yeah, my bylines were very smaller publications or for very little money, but I kind of just was doing those. And I know that a lot of people go, oh, well, don't work for less than you're worth, blah, blah, blah. But at the beginning, I kind of just took some stuff for very little money in order to just get bylines. And that's kind of sometimes what you have to do. So yeah, I kind of just ground it out and pitched all the time. And you have to pitch so much. And it's the most tiring part, I think, of freelancing, is coming up with new ideas all the time. Mm-hmm. But if you could get the email, I just kind of had to go for it and pretend I knew what I was doing. And just go for it.
I think that's very true. I listened to an interview several years ago with I think she was a freelance travel writer, and she was talking about pitching, and she was saying, like 80% of my job is pitching. Like really only 20% of it is writing. And I think a lot of people
argue 10% is chasing money.
Yeah,
and 10% is writing.
It's very true. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And there is nothing wrong with, working for less than you're worth when you're starting out. I'm always very suspicious of people who say they didn't do that, because I think it's very hard to get those first pieces under your belt, whether you're writing, whether you're doing graphic design, whether, any kind of situation where you need to build a portfolio of your work. It's really hard to do that without doing some free gigs here and there and writing
Absolutely.
for yogurt or whatever.
Oh yeah, I did a lot, and I did a lot of work. I worked at Travel Zoo actually for a period of time. So Travel Zoo is just like a travel deal company.
Right.
So I did a lot of content writing for them as well as doing my freelance in Toronto, because I needed to sustain something. So I did a lot of work for them and for their blog, but then through them, I ended up getting some Huffington Post gigs because Travel Zoo had a partnership with them. So doing those kind of things that I didn't really want to write about Edmonton hotels till I was blue in the face, but that kind of got me to having bylines on the Huffington Post, or, being able to take those other gigs that necessarily didn't pay me a lot, but, would give me the byline.
Exactly. And then when you can put that all together on a resume or a bio when you're sending it in and people see those titles, that does mean something to
Absolutely.
an editor who's looking at that and being able to say, yes, this person has practical experience. So while you were in Toronto, were you working for Travel Zoo at this point? You were, I think.
I did, yeah. I was at Travel Zoo and freelancing.
At what point did you guys decide to come home? Because both of you decided to come back to St. John's. And I think this is kind of an interesting trend that has been happening over the past few years, is so many young professionals who are coming back from Central Canada to Atlantic Canada for so many reasons. And what was it for you guys that brought you back?
Like you said, so many different reasons. I think for Adam as a lawyer, quality of life was like pretty limiting in Toronto. Yeah. So he was working to the grind all the time and had a really long commute, and that was just exhausting for him. So he knew if he came home, he would be able to have like a more 9 to 5-ish kind of job. And for me, it was funny because all these people who were not from Newfoundland started writing about Newfoundland, how cool it was. And it was really bothering me. Because not that they were doing it incorrectly, but I wanted to be like, I could have written that article. I should have pitched that. Like, I'm so proud of the culinary scene in Newfoundland and St. John's that I really was like, I wanted to come home and write about it. So, for me, it was about, stepping away from, like you said, that epicenter of food, where I was a small fish in a huge, huge pond of food writers. I met dozens and made some great friends with some great women. But I also wanted to come home and kind of like, there were no food writers here. Carl Wells was retiring. There were no food writers in Newfoundland, no bloggers, no nothing. So it was really for me a blank slate where I could kind of make that move. And be able to rent a house instead of renting a tiny 400 square foot apartment. So there was a kind of a bunch of different things, but we definitely were not the norm. So many people said to me when we moved home, why did you move home? So it was, and our families are all here. So there was just so many different things.
Are you happy with that decision?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The first winter, I was not. And this winter, Snowmageddon was pretty insane. But other than that, most of the time I'm very happy. I have a garden. I can walk to my parents for dinner. I can walk downtown. Adam works like a really reasonable amount of time, so we're able to travel and do things. So overall, happy. I think the pros definitely outweigh the cons.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I noticed after you moved back home, is that the amount of travel writing that you did really seemed to increase quite a bit. And not just international travel, but local travel too. And it was really quite refreshing because I had not seen a lot of content around Atlantic Canada as a travel destination. And so that was kind of nice, refreshing.
Yeah. Oh, and I think people don't think, like the East Coast is like, other than like, okay, you get to eat like fresh lobster or whatever. They don't really think of it in the same like as a culinary destination. But I do think that they have really amped their game. All tourism boards of Atlantic Canadian provinces have really amped up their culinary tourism and really stepped it up. The St. John's food scene is like, it's world famous now. We have amazing, Raymond's and Mallard Cottage. They are not just like, oh, people in East Coast know them. Like they're world renowned, Halifax has amazing restaurants, how the seafood festival in PEI, there's so many different things. So I was really excited to come home and explore all that for myself because I hadn't lived home in 8 years, but also to like tell the world how awesome it is out here.
It is. And you've had the opportunity to go to places like Fogo Island, which is I think it's on every Canadian's bucket list. If it's not, it should be. Such an amazing experience.
Oh, unreal.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, you have people like Chef Michael Smith, who's opening his inn, or has opened his inn on Prince Edward Island. And so you're getting these really interesting destinations that are culinary, but also so much more. Like it's a real full-on experience, and it's really
absolutely
awesome.
and high end. Like there is a dinner in the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia that you can do. It's $1,000 a head.
Whoa.
And you basically eat on the ocean floor in low tide. And it's this most beautiful looking thing ever. And then it sells out within minutes. Every year it's sold out within minutes.
Yeah, I didn't know about that, but that's very cool. There was a fellow on the news the other night who camped in the Bay of Fundy and wound up getting carried away by the tide.
Yeah, they're very fast rising tides.
Yes, so he was fine. He was safe. He managed to get to shore and everything. But that was an interesting story. Yeah, and so at some point while you were back in Newfoundland, you went from writing about food, and we're going to talk a little bit about your craft dinner post because I'm obsessed with that. But you went from writing about food to writing about finance. You became the associate editor for Atlantic Business Magazine, and that was such a big switch for you. I was so surprised when I saw that you had taken that position. And what was it about that really kind of drew you into it?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think I was really excited to work for a print magazine because I love print.
Yes.
I love newspapers. I love magazines. We've had conversations before. I know about beautifully printed like magazines. Yes. So when I was in journalism school, I did the magazine course. Like we made a magazine. Like I was really into print. So that was really appealing to me. There are very few print magazines in Atlantic Canada. That is the only real business magazine in Atlantic Canada. So when the opportunity came up, I was really intrigued because I wanted to bring a small business aspect to it that I found that they weren't touching on as much. I think they've been around for a long time. So obviously high finance was like very important. But when I went in there in my interview, I said, I want to write about like the small mom and pops and how important those are in Atlantic Canada and how they changed and are changing, in the 2020s or 2019, I guess then. But yeah, it was, so that was really what inspired me to kind of go after that. And I did launch, they had a culture section in the back of the magazine like decades ago, which I reinstated because I thought, the finance and business behind creative and cultural stuff is just as important as the high finance, especially on the East Coast. I mean, we have such a unique and creative world, so that for me was really important. So I kind of went in there being like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that is something you do not see in a lot of finance publications at all anywhere. And I know for me, as somebody who owns multiple small businesses, that's one of my biggest frustrations with a lot of business in quotation magazines that really focus on the companies that are going public or who are large or who are like the best employers in the province kind of thing, and they really kind of don't hit on those small businesses that are employing less than 10 people and that are really kind of the backbone of communities, which is so important in this 100%. Country. Small business is like the lifeline of this country. And when I say small business, I really do mean small. Some people, a small business is anything less than 100 employees, but to me, that's still a pretty large business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think
go ahead. We did a small business issue, and that had been something that they had done forever. And I was really excited about that issue as well. And about, young people and entrepreneurs. I set up a column called Let's Do Launch, and it was about startups in Atlantic Canada, all the cool things they're doing. I mean, there's like a bunch of Bitcoin mines in Labrador that like nobody knows about. So I got to learn all about Bitcoin and writing, learning about that because nobody knows that it even existed. Like there's a bunch of people from China and from Russia even, they're in Labrador right now, like just Bitcoin mining.
Wow.
Set up. Yeah. So like there's all these really cool things going on. So especially in the tech sector in like New Brunswick is really big in tech. So kind of looking at those places and yeah, those like startups that have like 5 or 10 people in a computer, with like a bunch of computers in a room.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've gotten to interview some really interesting, really cool entrepreneurs through that role for
Yeah.
sure.
It's it, it that is way more fascinating to me than large scale industry, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, is because I just felt like as a creative entrepreneur and as a woman in this country, there's just not a lot of community around it, or not a lot of discussion around it. And there are so many women who are working from home, running businesses where it's just them, or they might have an assistant or two who's helping them out, and they are the breadwinners in their family, and it's not talked about.
Absolutely. I'm nodding emphatically as you're saying this. Yes, I agree 100%.
It's not talked about. And I see all these articles about, oh, we need more women in tech. We need more women at the C level. We need more women on board of directors. And that is all very, very true. But at the same time, a lot of us have made a very conscious choice not to do those things because we very much want to be in charge of our own little enterprise. And we want the quality of life that comes with having a smaller business. Yeah, you know what? Maybe we'll never be a 7 or 8 figure business, but we're a nice, very solid mid 6-figure business or low 6-figure business. And that gives us the life that we want to have. And when I say life, I mean like the social aspect of our life as well as the career
Absolutely.
aspect of our life. And it gives us the opportunity to balance so many different things. And you and I don't have kids, but there are so many women out there who do this as a way to be at home with their kids. And they're like this backbone of our country. And I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but
No,
I
it's
just
okay.
get so passionate about this, and I do feel like it's a very overlooked segment of the Canadian economy. So
Absolutely. I mean, when I first moved home 3 years ago now, I started working at a co-working space, and I met this group of amazing women who were doing all these cool different things. One was running a beer tour. She also builds websites. She was a freelance travel writer and blogger. The other was working for a nonprofit remotely, and we are still quite close. We bonded over the fact that we were women in business, in different realms of business, and that we were all doing some relatively creative thing. And we are still very close today. We are able to hang out all the time and just bounce ideas off each other. Even though we weren't necessarily in the same field, it really helped to just kind of put it out into the world and say things out loud and be able to talk to each other. And we still, communicate on a pretty much daily basis through Facebook, or Facebook chat.
yeah.
But that has become so important to me since I moved home, and I never had that network in the same level in Toronto at all.
Yeah,
Definitely not.
totally, 100%. And it's, Lisa, who was my original co-host on the podcast, her and I, that is what we bonded over when we first met, was just being like two women who lived very close to each other, who were doing creative things that, a lot of people just thought were cute hobbies. But they weren't cute hobbies. They were real, and they were providing income. And I have a small mastermind group with 4 other women that are all across Canada, and they're also like we're all again in small creative businesses, and they're like my lifeline. They're my ladies.
Absolutely.
That I can do exactly as you said, bounce ideas off of, and who kind of understand the whole micro business, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Even questions about freelancing or about bookkeeping or about what bank account or any of those little stupid things that you don't even, if you Google it, you're going to get a million weird random answers. But like having somebody else who's gone through it at the same time with you really helps for sure.
Yes, absolutely. I'm super passionate about that, and that is my dream one day, is to have a print magazine. I'm throwing it out there into the world. A print magazine that focuses on women who are running small micro creative businesses like in Canada, because I don't feel like there's anything. There are some publications like that in the US, but I don't feel like we have anything that focuses on Canadian women who are doing that kind of work. And I would just love to put out a beautiful, almost coffee table style.
I know exactly. I can picture it right now.
Yeah,
we definitely need to chat more about that for sure.
We will. I have a list of people that are already like on who my contributors are going to be.
Oh, that was the dream. That is the dream. I love that.
Yeah, that is. I'm putting it out there into the universe. That is on my list of things to do, and I can't wait for that. But so here we are. We're in 2020 at this point, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I think it was around halfway through last year where you decided to go out and be 100% freelance, and is that the first point in time where you became a solo?
I had about a year in Toronto where I was also just full on freelance, but it was not as successful as last year. I was able I dove in really hard this year. I felt like I got a second chance to be able to do it again, because I kind of was ramping up in Toronto, then we decided to move home, and then I went to Atlantic Business, and I felt like, okay, now I can do this. I'm going to do it on my own. And I really went hard, and I felt like it was all ramping up really well. And then, then we had Snowmageddon. So for people who don't know about Newfoundland, we got like 100 centimeters of snow in like a couple days, and it was like we were all trapped in our homes for a week. So
that was crazy.
That just kind of like just started off 2020, and like that was just 2020 vibes. So that kind of happened, and then the pandemic happened, and as a travel and food writer, it kind of just stopped. Everything just paused because nobody knew what was going to happen day to day. Things were changing. I was writing things. I also write some food trends pieces for the Telegram and for the Saltwater Network of Papers on the East Coast. And I was writing things, and then literally before they were being published 5 days later, having to like re-edit them because stuff had changed that dramatically in like the 5 days. So so even that kind of stuff. So it was definitely challenging. It's kind of ramped up again now in the fall, especially with the Atlantic Canadian bubble opening up. I've been able to do a bit more travel food things. But it's definitely a weird time.
Yeah, and I have seen that you've started to be doing a little bit more on your social channels. And our September guest host was Angelina Brogan from Bacon is Magic, and she's a culinary travel writer. And she's really, we talk a little bit about how she's had to pivot quite a bit and come home, and she focuses mostly on Latin America, and she spends a lot of her time in Latin America, and obviously she's not able to do that right now. So she's come home, and she's really kind of diving into rediscovering Atlantic Canada as well. So but I think everybody at this point in 2020 has been affected in some strange way by what's been going on, and I think we're all hoping things get back to normal at some point. But I want to talk about your craft dinner post. I think this is like one of the most Canadian articles I've ever read.
And honestly, one of my most successful, to be honest.
I don't doubt that for a minute. So for those of you who may not be familiar, was it a year ago, 2 years ago?
It's like 2 or 3 now.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Feels like yesterday.
It was when I first moved home, within the first year. So at least 2 years ago.
So Gabby decided to do a craft dinner showdown. And craft dinner is, if you're not in Canada and you're listening to this, craft dinner, or KD as we also call it, is kind of almost like a national food.
It definitely is.
I don't think there's very many people who don't like it, but you decided to do a showdown where you and your friends went out and you bought every kind of boxed macaroni and cheese that you could get your hands on.
9 different ones.
Yes, here in Canada, every grocery store chain has their own, private label boxed mac and cheese. There are other ones out there that are brand name, and you guys cooked them all up. And you did a taste test. You did a showdown of it, and KD wasn't the winner.
It was not the winner. No. I know. I feel like I shouldn't divulge.
I know. That's almost. We won't tell you who the winner is. You have to go to Gabby's website, Food Girl in Town, to find out who won. and then you need to go out and buy that craft dinner or mac and cheese, and you need to do your own taste test and see.
Absolutely. And so it was very tricky because, you know, everyone has their own way of making KD.
Yes, this is the thing about
the box. So following the box directions for each one, which was they were all different. So I think that actually did sway who won, because I think the one who won had the best box directions and the best. So that's, yeah. So, but yeah, you'll have to read, because it was definitely enlightening. I didn't want to eat craft dinner for a little while after that because it did a lot. But I actually, funnily enough, just published a piece in the Telegram about craft dinner and like making craft dinner fancy, because now that everyone has bought all these pandemic staples like crazy, everyone was buying. Yeah, you can like toss some gorgonzola in there, some walnuts, some pear. You can like make it really fancy. There's lots of different ways you can jazz it up. So that's been my latest.
That's the thing with craft dinner. It is, everybody has their own way of making it. And I do remember when I was in high school, my first boyfriend, he asked me to come over at lunchtime or something. I don't know. And he offered to make craft dinner. And I was like, wow, craft dinner. Hey, and he's like, no, I make it really fancy. I put oregano in it. And I was just like, okay then.
I had someone make it with evaporated milk instead of regular milk once, and it blew my mind. I don't typically have that on hand, but it made it very creamy. It definitely gives it a different taste. But yeah, I remember it was actually a friend's boyfriend in high school, but because that's what they had around the house. That's what
that's what they knew how to make.
Yeah.
And it was perfect.
You're like, what?
Because you could make it on a school lunch hour. Like you could run home, and we did this all the time in high school. We would go to whoever lived closest, and we would make KD for lunch, because you could have it ready in 10 minutes, and everybody.
It was a big after school snack. It was a big after school snack for us.
Yeah.
Like, and my mom hated that because I'd go home and like eat a box of craft dinner, and then she'd be like, "I made dinner," but like you'd be starving at 3:00.
Yeah.
We used to make craft.
It is a very quintessential Canadian food, and I don't know what it is that made it so popular here, because it is an American product, really. It is. Yeah, it is. And yet we've really kind of, yeah. Even my dad was talking about it the other day with the new KD commercial where they make it in a blender for the guy who's in and I thought it was so clever that they got Stephen Page to be in that commercial as well with the fancy ketchups. That was, yes. So anyway, you have to go check it out on Gabby's website, Food Girl in Town. And she has lots of other great food and travel content on there. Yeah. So what is next for you right now in terms of what's going on? Are you looking forward to being able to get back out there and travel a little more?
Yeah, I've actually been doing some content for Destination St. John's. Doing some content creation for them. And I've just been kind of digging in. I would like to write a bit more food history stuff. So I've been kind of digging in and pitching that kind of stuff a little bit more, because that's something that I can do from here and don't necessarily have to travel for. So I've been doing some archival work. Going on that realm a little bit more for sure. So it's, but yeah, I mean, I got to travel around Newfoundland a lot this summer. So I have a lot of writing to do from the travels that we had, because we went to the west coast of Newfoundland for the first time, did Gross Mourne and all that kind of stuff. So that I had done it as a child, but not since then. So lots of different things to write about out there for sure.
Awesome. That is great. So you're going to be back for the rest of the month. Well, for 4 weeks this month. There's 5 Fridays in October, but Gabby's going to be with us for the first 4. And we are going to be talking a little bit about, as I mentioned, pitching specifically from the viewpoint of somebody who is a writer. So we've done other pitching podcasts where we've done it more as a generic type of pitching, regardless of what kind of niche you're in. But in this case, we're going to really dive into pitching from a writing perspective and a journalism perspective. And I think we're also going to talk a little bit about how to stand out when you're in a smaller urban center, which I think is something that a lot of Canadians can relate to. We touched on it a little bit in this conversation here, where quite often Toronto is sort of the default setting on the country.
Yeah.
And yet there are people all across the country. And with a country as geographically big as Canada, it is a very different geographical landscape from one end to the other. And that plays a big role in who we are as a country and who we are as people who live in those areas. And so there is a huge opportunity out there for people who are in smaller centers to really dive in and create a creative life for themselves, whether they are writers, whether they're artisans, whether they're into food or painting or whatever it is. There's so many opportunities when you live in a smaller center. And I think sometimes we overlook them because we're so busy looking at how we can succeed in that bigger picture, like a Toronto or a Montreal or even a Vancouver to a lesser extent, although I sort of view Vancouver as a smaller urban center. Other people might not agree, but
I do.
But being on opposite ends of the country, Gabby's on the far East Coast, I'm on the far West Coast, and I think there is a kind of a different coastal ideology maybe in this country.
100%.
Yes, where we kind of don't really register with what goes on in the middle. We sort of feel like we're these weird bookends that the rest of the country isn't very aware of sometimes.
Well, yes, Canada ends at Halifax, obviously. Come on. There's nothing past that.
I know, and the Rocky Mountains are the end on the West Coast. It's kind of like, we hear this all the time in BC, Western Canada, Western Canada, Western Canada, and they're talking about Alberta. It's like, no, there's a whole other Western Canada on the other side of Alberta. But anyway, so we're gonna be talking about how you can, if you are in a smaller urban center, how you can use that to your advantage. And there's so many different things that you can do. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation. We haven't decided what our last topic's going to be yet, but it'll be something cool.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, Gabby, it was so great to have you join me today, and I'm so excited that you're here for the rest of the month. And where can people find you outside of Food Girl in Town? Where can they find you on social media and other places that you might be?
Well, Instagram is definitely my biggest jam. So Gabby Peyton Eats is my handle on Twitter and Instagram, but Instagram is where I'm usually can be found posting about whatever I eat all the time. So that's my biggest one for sure.
And we'll link to all of that in the show notes so that you can find Gabby. But yeah, she has a great Instagram account. It'll make you hungry. I guarantee it. It'll also make you get itchy feet for traveling to Eastern Canada. It is an amazing place to go visit, and Newfoundland is one of only 2 provinces in the country that I have not been to. So
I know, you got to get out here.
I know, it was what I wanted to do this summer, to be quite honest. And obviously that's not happening. I wanted to do a whole Atlantic Canada trip and do Newfoundland. PEI is the other province I've never been to, which also just makes my heart so sad.
It's so beautiful there, and with your Anna Green Gables fanaticism, my goodness, like you have to get out there.
I've always wanted to see the red roads, and so
it's beautiful.
Yes, so we're gonna wrap it up for this week. Thank you for being here, Gabby, and thank you all of you for joining us, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshelookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshelookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshelookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.